Is that all you need, Ms. Bennett? Asked Tanya, my executive assistant, tablet in hand as she stood in the doorway of my corner office. I nodded, running my finger along the edge of my mahogany desk. That's all for today. The quarterly reports. Look good. Make sure everyone knows I appreciate their hard work. Of course. Have a good evening. She smiled and closed the door behind her. 48 floors above the bustling city, my office fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air. Conditioning. I turned my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the skyline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 years. It had been 6 years since David walked out, leaving nothing but a handwritten note on our kitchen counter. 6 years since I'd stood alone in our apartment, 7 months pregnant, reading the words that changed everything. I'm not ready for this life. I'm sorry. No warning. No discussion. Just 12 words that collapsed my world like a house of cards. I placed my hand on the framed photo on my desk, my daughter Emma, now 5, with her curly brown hair and eyes that mirrored mine, not his. She was the one beautiful thing that came from that devastating betrayal. My intercom buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry to interrupt. Tanya's voice came through, slightly hesitant. HR sent up the final paperwork for tomorrow's new hires. They need your signature before end of day. Send them in, I replied, straightening my tailored navy suit and smoothing back my hair. The HR packet was thick, 15 new employees joining Artemis Technologies tomorrow, part of our expansion after securing the Collins contract. I flipped through the profiles, scanning qualifications and placement details, when my hand froze on page 10. David Walker. Age 38. Position: Junior Data Entry Specialist. My heart lurched. The photo stared back at me, older with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but unmistakably him, the man who had walked out on me and our unborn child. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then a strange calm washed over me as I read his placement details again. Junior Data Entry Specialist, entry-level position, lowest pay grade in the company. He had no idea who owned Artemis Technologies. I'd built the company under my maiden name, Bennett, not the Walker surname I'd once so proudly taken. The corporate structure was complex, a labyrinth of holding companies and private investments I'd carefully constructed over the years. Did he know he'd applied to work for his ex-wife? Had he seen my name anywhere in the process? No. Impossible. I'd remained deliberately private, keeping my name off public documents, staying out of press photos, building Artemis from the shadows. The few corporate headshots in circulation were years outdated, showing a different version of me. Before the pregnancy, before the betrayal, before I'd transformed grief into ambition. I stared at his application details. David Walker, once, a promising marketing executive at Meridian Group, the same company where we'd met 8 years ago. Now applying for an entry-level position at age 38. What had happened in the years since he'd walked out? My fingers hovered over the signature line. I could reject the application. One stroke of my pen and he'd never set foot in my building. Instead, I signed. As I finished the last of the paperwork, my phone buzzed with a text from my nanny. Emma asking for pancakes for dinner. Permission to indulge? I smiled, typing back, whole wheat only. I'll be home in an hour. Closing the HR file, I leaned back in my chair. David Walker would be reporting to work tomorrow, completely unaware that the woman he'd abandoned was now signing his paychecks. The irony was almost poetic. The sun had nearly set as I gathered my things, sliding the HR packet into my bag. Tomorrow would be interesting, to say the least. Cars waiting, Ms. Bennett. Tanya informed me as I stepped out of my office. Thank you, Tanya. See you tomorrow. I walked toward the private elevator, my mind already formulating a plan. David wouldn't be working on my floor, of course. Junior data specialists were housed in the East Wing, third floor, processing information for our smaller clients. He'd report to Marcus in data services, who reported to Joanna in operations, who reported to me. 3 layers of management between us, enough distance to observe without direct contact. The elevator doors closed, and I descended from my penthouse office toward the waiting car, my thoughts racing ahead to tomorrow. What would I do if we crossed paths in the hallway? Would he recognize me? I'd changed in 6 years. My hair was shorter, styled differently. I'd lost the softness pregnancy had given me. Power had reshaped me, hardened my edges. My driver opened the car door as I emerged from the building. Home, Ms. Bennett? Yes, James. Thank you. As the car pulled into traffic, I opened my tablet and pulled up the company directory. A few quick taps granted me access to security protocols. I entered David's employee ID and flagged it for enhanced monitoring, all his computer activities, building access. Even lunch breaks would now be logged and reported directly to my private server. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. I needed to know what kind of man David Walker had become in the 6 years since he'd abandoned his pregnant wife. The city lights blurred outside my window as we drove toward the residential district where Emma and I lived. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the day I'd brought her home from the hospital. Alone, terrified, but determined. Those first months had been a blur of sleepless nights, breast pumps, and tears, all while laying the groundwork for what would become Artemis Technologies. Emma had been my strength when I had none left. Every milestone, her first smile, first step, first word, had fueled my determination to build something meaningful, something that would ensure she never wanted for anything. My thoughts drifted to David again. What would he say if he knew about the daughter he'd never met? The child whose existence he'd rejected before she'd even drawn her first breath? The car pulled into our private driveway, the security gate closing behind us. Our home, a modern 3-story overlooking the city park, was modest compared to what I could afford, but it was perfect for Emma and me. Warm lights glowed from inside, and I could see Emma's silhouette dancing in the kitchen window. "We're here, Ms. Bennett," James said, opening my door. "Thank you, James. See you tomorrow at 7. Inside, the smell of maple syrup and the sound of giggles greeted me. I dropped my bag in the foyer and followed the noise to our kitchen, where Emma was helping Maria, our nanny, flip pancakes at the stove. "Mommy!" Emma squealed, abandoning her post to launch herself into my arms. I caught her, burying my face in her curls, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, pumpkin. I see you convinced Maria about pancakes." Emma nodded solemnly. "Whole wheat, just like you said." I exchanged a grateful look with Maria over Emma's head. "Thank you for staying late." "Of course, Ms. Bennett. Her homework's done too." Maria wiped her hands on a kitchen towel. "Do you need me to stay for dinner?" "No, I've got it from here. See you tomorrow." After Maria left, Emma led me to the table where she'd already set 2 places with her favorite unicorn plates. I kicked off my heels and let her serve me pancakes with exaggerated ceremony. "How was school today?" I asked, cutting a small piece. "Good. I got a gold star in math and Ms. Peterson said my dinosaur drawing was scientifically accurate. That's my girl." We ate together, Emma chattering about her day, me soaking in every word, pushing thoughts of David to the back of my mind. This was my reality now. Emma and me, our little family of 2, complete in our own way. After dinner, bath time, and 2 bedtime stories, I tucked Emma in, kissing her forehead as her eyelids grew heavy. "Love you to the moon and back," I whispered, our nightly ritual. "And to the stars and home again," she mumbled sleepily. I stood in her doorway watching her chest rise and fall, marveling at the person she was becoming. Strong, kind, curious. Everything I'd fought to be. Back in my home office, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and opened my laptop. The evening stretched before me. Time to prepare for tomorrow's encounter, however indirect it might be. I pulled up David's application, again, studying it more carefully this time. Employment history showed he'd left Meridian Group shortly after leaving me, bouncing between 4 companies in 6 years, each position less prestigious than the last. Credit report revealed significant debt. Credit cards maxed out, a car loan in collections, rent consistently late. The man who'd abandoned me because he wasn't ready for responsibility had apparently been drowning in it ever since. I took a sip of wine, letting the information settle. Part of me, a small, wounded part I thought I'd silenced years ago, felt a vindictive satisfaction. But the CEO in me remained analytical, calculating, searching for the bigger picture. Why had he applied to Artemis? We weren't known for our generous entry-level salaries. Our reputation was built on innovation and exclusivity. We hired the best and expected excellence. Junior data specialists were typically recent graduates, not 38-year-old former marketing executives, unless he was desperate. I searched his social media profiles. Not much activity in recent years, but his relationship status was single. No evidence of other children or significant attachments. His last post 3 months ago was a quote about new beginnings. How ironic. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. Tomorrow, David Walker would walk into my company, completely unaware that his past had circled back to claim him. Would I reveal myself? Confront him? Fire him on the spot? No. That would be too simple, too quick. 6 years ago, he'd walked away, without facing the consequences of his actions. This time, I wanted him to understand exactly what he'd thrown away. I finished my wine and headed to bed, my mind made up. I would watch, wait, and when the moment was right, I would show David Walker exactly who I'd become in his absence. Morning came with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I dressed with particular care, a charcoal pencil skirt, crimson, silk blouse, and the Louboutin David had once promised to buy me but never did. Small diamond studs in my ears, a gift to myself when Artemis secured its first $1 million contract. You look especially nice today, Maria commented as she helped Emma pack her lunch. Big day, I replied, accepting the coffee she offered. New hires starting. Emma looked up from her cereal. Can I come see your work someday, Mommy? Of course, Pumpkin. Maybe next week for Take Your Child to Work Day. I kissed the top of her head, savoring her innocent question. Emma had no idea her father worked for me now, or rather, would be, working for me in approximately 1 hour. The thought sent a small thrill through me. James was waiting in the driveway, car door open. Good morning, Ms. Bennett. Morning, James. We need to make a stop today. Of course. Where to? The East Wing entrance. I want to observe the new hire orientation. If James found the request unusual, he didn't show it. Yes, ma'am. New employees traditionally entered through the East Wing, where HR conducted orientations before assigning them to their departments. The main entrance, where I typically arrived, was reserved for executives and clients. We pulled up to the side of the building at 8:45 a.m. Orientation began at 9:00, and punctuality was strictly enforced at Artemis. Wait here, please, I instructed. James, stepping out of the car. The morning air was crisp as I positioned myself near the entrance, pretending to take a call while observing the stream of nervous new hires arriving. Most were young, dressed in their interview best, clutching portfolios and coffee cups, shooting anxious glances at the imposing glass building. Then I saw him. David walked with less confidence than I remembered, his shoulders slightly hunched, in a suit that had seen better days. His hair was thinner now, with threads of gray at the temples. He checked his watch repeatedly as he approached the entrance, his expression tense. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 6 years of imagining this moment hadn't prepared me for the reality of seeing him again. The man who had promised to love me forever, who had placed his hand on my swollen belly and talked about our future together, who had left without saying, "Goodbye." He passed within 10 feet of me, eyes straight ahead, not sparing a glance for the woman in the crimson blouse pretending to be deeply engaged in a phone conversation. He didn't recognize me. Of course not. The Catherine he knew had been softer, more trusting, her edges not yet honed by betrayal and determination. I watched him disappear into the building, then waited a few more minutes before returning to the car. "Main entrance now, James." Back in my office, I pulled up the security feeds on my private monitor. Split-screen views showed the orientation room where David and 14 other new hires were being welcomed to Artemis Technologies. I watched as they received their security badges, signed final paperwork, and began their company introduction. Tanya knocked and entered with my morning schedule. "The Collins team will be calling at 10, and the board wants to move Friday's meeting to Thursday at 3. "Fine. Also, I want an update on the new hires by end of day. How they're settling in, initial supervisor impressions, that sort of thing. All. 15 of them?" Tanya raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "No, Ms. Bennett. I'll have it for you by 5. When she left, I returned my attention to the security feed. The orientation group was now touring the facilities. I watched David's face as he moved through the building, noting how his eyes widened at the state-of-the-art technology, the sleek design, the evident success of Artemis. Did he regret his choices yet? Did he wonder what might have been if he'd stayed? The day progressed in a blur of meetings and decisions. By late afternoon, the new hires had been dispatched to their respective departments. David was now sitting at a workstation in the data services division, receiving training from a team lead who didn't look much older than 25. My intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, Marcus Phillips from Data Services is here with the quarterly. Workflow analysis, perfect timing. Send him in." Marcus entered, a thick binder in hand. He'd been with Artemis for 3 years, working his way up from the same position David now occupied. "The numbers look good, Ms. Bennett," he began, opening the binder. "We're processing 22% more data than last quarter with only a 4% increase in labor hours." "Excellent. How are the new team members settling in?" "So far, so good. We've got 2 starting today, Zoe Chen and David Walker. Zoe's a recent grad, very sharp. David's a bit older, transitioning from marketing. Seems eager to learn, though." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I noticed that. Walker's resume shows quite a career change. Any insights?" Marcus hesitated. He mentioned some personal setbacks, didn't elaborate. His technical skills are basic, but his analytical thinking is strong. I've got him starting on the Westfield account. Straightforward data sets, good training ground. "I see. Keep me updated on his progress, will you? I'm interested in these career transitions." "Of course, Ms. Bennett." After Marcus left, I pulled up the Westfield account. It was indeed straightforward. A regional retailer whose data needs were minimal. Perfect for training, and perfectly boring for someone who once developed marketing strategies for luxury brands. How the mighty had fallen. By 5:30 p.m., Tanya delivered the promised update on the new hires. I flipped straight to David's entry. David Walker, Junior Data Specialist. Supervisor notes. Quick learner, respectful, completed initial training modules ahead of schedule. Some difficulty with specialized software, receiving additional guidance. Mentioned housing concerns during lunch break. Recently relocated following eviction, currently in temporary accommodations. Eviction. That explained the desperate job change. I wondered what else had happened in the years since he'd walked. Out on me and our unborn child. I closed the file, my mind made up. Tanya, I need you to do something discreetly. Contact HR and have them schedule David Walker for the Thompson systems training next week. Tanya looked surprised. The advanced analytics course? But Ms. Bennett, that's usually reserved for employees who've been here at least 6 months. I'm aware. Tell them it's a pilot program. We're testing aptitude-based advancement rather than tenure. They'll understand. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was indeed testing David, just not in the way HR would assume. The Thompson systems were notoriously complex, and the training was rigorous. Most new hires failed the first time, some the second. It was a baptism by fire that separated the exceptional from the merely adequate. I wanted to see what David was made of now. As I packed up for the day, my phone rang. Emma's school. My heart raced as I answered. Ms. Bennett, this is Principal. Goodwin. There's been an incident with Emma. Is she hurt? I was already grabbing my keys. No, nothing like that. There was an altercation with another student during recess. Emma pushed a boy who was teasing her about not having a dad. My stomach dropped. I'll be right there. 20 minutes later, I sat in the principal's office, Emma beside me, her eyes red from crying. Tyler said I was broken because I don't have a daddy, she hiccuped. He said normal families have mommies and daddies, and I said we're normal, just different. But he laughed and said I was a reject. Each word was a knife to my heart. I pulled her close, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. You are perfect exactly as you are, I whispered fiercely. There's nothing wrong with our family. Principal Goodwin looked sympathetic. Tyler's being disciplined for his comments, but we still don't condone physical responses, Emma. I understand, I replied, stroking Emma's hair. We'll talk about better ways to handle these situations. Outside in the car, Emma was quiet, staring out the window. Mommy? Why did my daddy leave? Didn't he want me? The question I'd been dreading for years, delivered with such raw vulnerability that I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. Your father, I began carefully, wasn't ready to be a parent. That was his loss, Emma, not yours. Never yours. But everyone else has a daddy. Not everyone. Layla has 2 mommies, remember? And Miguel lives with his grandma. Families come in all different shapes. She nodded, but I could see the questions lingering in her eyes. Questions I couldn't fully answer without revealing the depth of David's betrayal, the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat in my office staring at David's employee file again. His emergency contact was listed as Patricia Walker, his mother, the same woman who'd once been excited to become a grandmother, who'd helped plan our gender reveal party, who'd stopped returning my calls the day after David left. Had she known he was planning to abandon us? Had she supported his decision? I closed the file, suddenly exhausted. 6 years of building walls around my heart, of channeling pain into purpose, and all it took was one day of having David back in my periphery to make those walls tremble. But I wouldn't break. Not again. This time I held all the cards. I opened my calendar and scheduled a company-wide meeting for Friday afternoon, a quarterly update where all departments would gather in the main auditorium. David would be there, along with every other employee of Artemis Technologies. It would be his first glimpse of the CEO he now worked for, his first realization of whose company he'd joined, his first understanding of the woman he'd left behind. I went to bed that night with a plan forming in my mind. David Walker had walked away once without consequences. This time would be different. This time, I would determine when and how his story ended. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the hallways empty except for the occasional maintenance worker. I liked these moments before the day officially began, time to think without interruption. I'd slept poorly, Emma's questions about her father echoing in my mind. For 5 years I'd managed to deflect her curiosity with age-appropriate half-truths. But she was getting older, more perceptive. Soon, vague explanations wouldn't be enough. My private monitor displayed the security feeds from throughout the building. I clicked through until I found the data services department. Still dark, of course. David wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours. Early morning, Ms. Bennett? I startled slightly, turning to find Joanna Kim, my operations director, standing in my doorway with 2 coffee cups. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering one to me. "Saw your light on when I came in." Joanna had been with me from the beginning, my first hire when Artemis was nothing more than a business plan and a dream. She knew about Emma, about the pregnancy, about David walking out. She didn't know he now worked for us. "Thanks," I said, accepting the coffee. Couldn't sleep. She leaned against my desk, studying me with the familiar scrutiny that had made her invaluable as my right hand. "Something's up. You've got that look." "What look?" "The one you had before you fired the entire marketing team last year? The someone's about to discover actions have consequences look." I sighed, deciding transparency with Joanna was necessary. "David Walker is one of our new data specialists." Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "David Walker as in Emma's father." "Yes." "Jesus, Catherine," she set her cup down. "Does he know you own Artemis?" "No, and I'd like to keep it that way. For now." Joanna processed this information, her expression shifting from shock to something closer to calculation. Like me, she'd built her career on strategic thinking. "The company meeting on Friday," she said slowly. "You're planning to reveal yourself then?" "Perhaps. And then what? Fire him on the spot? That would be quite the power move." I turned back to the monitors. "I haven't decided yet." Joanna was quiet for a moment. "You know, in the 6 years I've known you, you've never once mentioned wanting revenge on him." "I didn't. Building Artemis, raising Emma, those were my priorities. And now? Now he's walked right into my company, Joanna. What would you do?" She considered this. "I'd want to understand why. Why now? Why here? Coincidences this big make me suspicious." I hadn't considered that angle. Could David have known? But how? I'd been careful, methodical about keeping my identity as CEO private. "Look into it," I instructed. "Discreetly. See if there's any connection we're missing." "Will do." She picked up her coffee again. "And Catherine? Whatever you decide, I've got your back." After she left, I pulled up David's HR file again, studying his application timeline. He'd applied 3 weeks ago, been interviewed by HR and Marcus from Data Services, with no interaction with upper management. Standard procedure for entry-level positions. Nothing suspicious there. At 8:45, my intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, your 9 a.m. with the legal team is set up in conference room B," Tanya informed me. "Thank you. I'll be right there." The morning disappeared in a flurry of meetings, contract negotiations, patent applications, strategic planning for next quarter. But beneath it all, my mind kept returning to David, now somewhere in the building, processing data for clients. He'd never meet, reporting to managers who reported to directors who reported to me. By lunchtime, I needed to see him again, not through security cameras, but in person. I texted Joanna. "Need to observe D. Walker in natural habitat. Suggestions?" Her reply came quickly. "Surprise quality check on data services at 1:30. I'll create a diversion for Marcus so he doesn't announce you." At 1:28, I stepped into the elevator heading down to the 3rd floor, heart hammering against my ribs. This was irrational, unprofessional. I was the CEO, for God's sake, not some lovesick teenager. But I needed to see him, see how he operated in my company, among my employees. The data services department occupied half of the 3rd floor, rows of workstations arranged in pods, each analyst focused on their screens, the quiet hum of productivity filling the space. I entered through the side door, using my master key card to bypass the standard security alert that announced visitors. I spotted him immediately. David sat in a pod near the windows, brow furrowed in concentration as he navigated through what appeared to be a training module. His desk was bare except for a company-issued water bottle and a small notebook. No personal items, no photos. Nothing to indicate a life outside these walls. I moved quietly between the rows, nodding to employees, who noticed me. Most were too absorbed in their work to look up. I positioned myself at an empty workstation about 20 feet from David, opening a random file on the computer to appear busy while I observed him. He looked tired. The confident marketing executive I'd married had been replaced by a man who checked his work repeatedly, who seemed to second-guess each action before committing. When a younger colleague stopped to offer help, his smile was grateful but strained. "That's it, exactly," I heard him say. "Thanks, Zoe. I've been stuck on this for 20 minutes. "No problem," the young woman replied. "The interface is super unintuitive at first. Took me weeks during my internship to get the hang of it. Their easy camaraderie surprised me." The David I remembered had always maintained a professional distance from subordinates, viewing workplace friendships as potential complications. My phone vibrated silently, a text from Joanna. "Marcus heading back to department. Wrap it up." Stood, closing the file I'd opened, and turned to leave. That's when David looked up, his eyes sweeping across the room and landing briefly on me. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought he recognized me. His gaze lingered a fraction too long, a slight crease appearing between his eyebrows. Then Zoe asked him a question, and the moment passed. He turned back to his screen, and I slipped out the side door, exhaling slowly once I was safely in the hallway. "Ms. Bennett?" Marcus had arrived, looking surprised to find me there. "Was there something you needed from data services?" "Just a quick visual assessment," I replied smoothly. "The quarterly audit is coming up, and I like to see departments in their natural state before the formal review." "Of course. Would you like me to show you anything specific?" "No need. I've seen what I came for." Back in my office, I replayed the moment in my mind. Had he recognized me? No. There had been no shock, no double take. Just a brief moment of curious attention, the kind anyone might give to a stranger who seemed out of place. My phone rang. Emma's school again. My stomach clenched as I answered. "Ms. Bennett? It's Emma's teacher, Ms. Peterson." "Nothing's wrong," she added quickly, sensing my anxiety. "I just wanted to discuss something from class today." I relaxed slightly. "Go ahead." "We're doing family tree projects this week." When I explained the assignment, Emma became upset. She said she couldn't complete it because she only has half a family. I assured her that all family structures are valid, but I thought you should know. Another knife to the heart. "Thank you for telling me. I'll talk to her tonight." After. Hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the phone. Emma's pain was my pain, magnified and sharpened by my inability to shield her from the reality of David's abandonment. The intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, the Thompson system trainer is here to discuss next week's session. Send them in." Lisa Chen, our senior systems trainer, entered with a tablet and a concerned expression. "Ms. Bennett, I received the directive about including David Walker in next week's Thompson training, but I'm concerned it's too advanced for someone at his level." Noted. However, I want to test a new approach to employee development. Some people rise to challenges when given the opportunity. With all due respect, the Thompson system is incredibly complex. Most junior specialists train for at least 6 months before attempting it. I understand your concerns, Lisa, but Mr. Walker has extensive analytical experience from his previous career. I believe he may surprise us. She looked skeptical but nodded. I'll prepare the materials, but I should warn you, our failure rate for first-time trainees is nearly 80%. Then we'll see which percentage Mr. Walker falls into, won't we? After she left, I scheduled a meeting with our head of HR for the following morning. If I was going to test David's capabilities, I needed to ensure everything was properly documented. At tea, Tanya brought in the daily update on new hires. Mr. Walker completed all his basic training modules today, she reported. His supervisor notes he's catching on quickly but seems anxious about job security. Apparently, he asked twice about the probationary period policies. Interesting. Anything else? He mentioned childcare difficulties to a colleague during lunch, something about his usual arrangements falling through. My eyebrows shot up. Childcare? He has a child? Tanya consulted her notes. That's what was reported, but no details were provided. His HR file lists him as single with no dependents. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Could David have another child? A child he hadn't abandoned? Thank you, Tanya. That's all for today. After she left, I pulled up our employee database, accessing personal information I rarely examined. David's health insurance enrollment showed only himself, no dependents. His emergency contact was still his mother. Tax withholding indicated single filing status. If he had another child, they weren't officially acknowledged in his employment records. My hands shook slightly as I closed the files. Why did the possibility upset me so much? I'd moved on years ago. David's life was no longer connected to mine, except through Emma, the daughter he'd never met, never acknowledged. Except now he worked for me. Now his livelihood depended on my company, my decisions. I left the office earlier than usual, instructing James to take me to Emma's school for pickup rather than home where Maria would have already collected her. Emma's face lit up when she saw me waiting in the pickup line. "Mommy, you came to school." "Surprise," I said, helping her with her backpack. "I thought we could get ice cream before dinner." Her eyes widened. "Really? But it's a school night." Sometimes we need to break the rules a little. At the ice cream parlor, Emma happily devoured a scoop of mint chocolate chip while I picked at my vanilla. Ms. Peterson told me about the family tree project, I said carefully. Emma's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I don't want to do it." "Why not?" "Because everyone else has big trees with lots of branches. Mine would just be a stick." Her bottom lip trembled slightly. "Oh, Emma." I reached across the table to take her small hand. Families come in all sizes and shapes, and trees do too. Some of the strongest trees have just a few branches. But what about when you have to put pictures? I don't even know what my dad looks like. The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course, I'd put away all photos of David after he left, erasing him from our home as completely as he'd erased us from his life. "Would you like to see pictures of him?" I asked carefully. She nodded, eyes wide. "Do you have some?" "At home, in storage. We can look at them tonight if you want." She considered this, then nodded again, more firmly. "Yes, for my project." That night, after Emma was in bed, I retrieved a small box from the back of my closet, the last remaining evidence of my life with David. Inside were wedding photos, vacation snapshots, the ultrasound picture he'd carried in his wallet until the day he walked out. I selected a few appropriate images: David at his college graduation, David at his parents' anniversary party, David and me on our honeymoon, faces glowing with a happiness that now seemed like a cruel joke. Nothing that would reveal the depth of what he'd thrown away. Nothing that would show Emma how completely he had once promised to love us both. Tomorrow, I'd give her these photos for her project. Tomorrow, I'd help her create a family tree that acknowledged his existence without glorifying his role in our lives. And tomorrow, I'd decide exactly how to proceed with the man who now processed data in the company I'd built while raising the child he'd abandoned. Morning came with a sense of resolve. I'd spent half the night thinking about David, about Emma, about the tangled web that connected us. I found some pictures, I told Emma over breakfast, sliding an envelope across the table. For your project. She opened it eagerly, eyes widening as she examined each photo. He looks like me, she whispered, touching a picture of David laughing at a picnic. You have his smile, I admitted. It was true. Emma's dimpled grin was pure David, though her eyes and determination were all mine. Was he nice? She asked. How to answer that? The David I'd married had been kind, generous, ambitious. The David who'd walked out on his pregnant wife had been selfish, cowardly, cruel. He was complicated, I finally said. People change, Emma. Sometimes they make choices that hurt others. She studied the photos a moment longer. Can I use these for my project? Of course. That's why I found them. At the office, I scheduled an impromptu meeting with Marcus from Data Services. How are the new hires progressing? I asked when he arrived. Very well, Ms. Bennett. Zoe's already handling some client data independently, and David's moving through the training faster than expected. Tell me more about Walker. His background is unusual for the position. Marcus shifted in his seat. True, but he's adapting well. Very detail-oriented, careful with the data, asks good questions. Any concerns? Nothing serious. He seems, I don't know, anxious. Like he's waiting for something to go wrong. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I understand he's been selected for the Thompson training next week. Yes, though I have to say I was surprised by that. We don't usually fast-track new hires, especially for something as complex as Thompson. Consider it an experiment in talent recognition. Some people have untapped potential. Marcus nodded, though he looked unconvinced. Of course, Ms. Bennett. After he left, Joanna arrived with an update on her investigation. Nothing suspicious, she reported. David applied through the normal channels, was interviewed by standard protocols, and accepted the position within our usual time frame. If he knows you own Artemis, there's no evidence of it. What about the child care comment? Joanna hesitated. That's where it gets interesting. I had coffee with Zoe Chen this morning. Casually mentioned team dynamics. She said David mentioned having to pick up his kid from aftercare yesterday because the usual person couldn't. But she got the impression it wasn't his child, possibly a niece or nephew. Relief and confusion warred within me. Keep digging, discreetly. Will do. Oh, and Catherine? The board is asking questions about the company meeting tomorrow. They're wondering why all departments need to be present for what's usually an executive update. Tell them I'm announcing a new company-wide initiative. It's not entirely false. Joanna nodded, understanding in her eyes. And have you decided? About David? Not yet. At noon, I received the surveillance report I'd requested. David had spent the morning focused on his training modules, taking only one break to make a phone call in the stairwell, a conversation our audio couldn't capture. He'd eaten lunch alone at his desk, reviewing materials while he ate a sandwich brought from home. Nothing revelatory. Nothing to indicate he was anything other than a struggling former executive trying to rebuild his career from the ground up. Why wasn't that satisfaction enough? I'd succeeded where he'd failed. I'd built an empire while raising our child alone. His current struggles were justice, weren't they? Yet something felt unfinished, incomplete. At 2:30, my intercom buzzed. Ms. Bennett, your 3 o'clock is here early. The Thompson client representative. Send them in. Richard Thompson himself walked through my door, founder and CEO of Thompson Industries, and our biggest client. We'd met several times over the years, developing a mutual respect that had proven profitable for both our companies. Catherine, he greeted me warmly. Hope you don't mind me arriving early. Traffic was lighter than expected. Not at all, Richard. Always good to see you. He settled into the chair across from me, declining my offer of coffee. I wanted to discuss something before our formal meeting. Of course. I understand you're fast-tracking a new employee for our systems training, David. Walker? I kept my expression carefully neutral. Yes. We're experimenting with aptitude-based advancement. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting coincidence. How so? David Walker used to work with my nephew at Meridian Group. James speaks highly of his marketing acumen, says he was on track for partnership before he suddenly left. My pulse quickened. I wasn't aware of the connection. Small world in business, Richard replied with a shrug. James mentioned Walker went through a rough patch. Divorce, I think? Said he'd lost touch with him until recently. Divorce? We'd never divorced, never needed to. We weren't legally married when David left, having opted for a private ceremony, with plans to make it official after Emma was born. When he walked out, there had been no legal ties to sever. Recently? I asked, keeping my voice even. Yes, ran into him at some charity thing a few months back. Said Walker seemed down on his luck, looking for work. James might have mentioned Artemis was hiring in data services. The pieces clicked into place. David hadn't randomly applied to my company. He'd been directed here, by the nephew of our biggest client, no less. That's quite a coincidence indeed, I managed. Richard nodded, oblivious to my inner turmoil. I told James I'd keep an eye out for him. Good people deserve second chances, don't you think? Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. The special ringtone I'd assigned to Emma's school. I excused myself to answer. Ms. Bennett? This is Nurse Garcia from River Prep. Emma had an incident during recess. She fell on the playground and may have sprained her wrist. She's asking for you. I'll be right there, I said, already gathering my things. Richard, I apologize, but there's an emergency with my daughter. Can we reschedule? He stood immediately, concern evident. Of course. Family first, always. I hope she's all right. Thank you for understanding. In the car, I called Maria, asking her to meet me at the school. My mind raced, processing both Emma's injury and the revelation about David's arrival at Artemis. Not a coincidence. Not fate. A calculated move suggested by someone connected to my company. Did David know? Had James Thompson told him who owned Artemis? Or had David simply followed a job lead, unaware he was walking straight into my domain? Entering the nurse's office, I found Emma sitting with an ice pack on her wrist, tears dried on her cheeks, but a brave smile in place. Mommy, I did a cartwheel, but it went wrong. I knelt beside her, carefully examining her wrist. Brave girl. We're going to take you to the doctor to make sure it's okay. As the nurse explained what had happened, my phone buzzed with a text from Joanna. Just discovered, D. Walker's emergency contact changed this morning. No longer his mother. Now lists Patricia Reynolds. Patricia Reynolds. My mother. The emergency contact I'd listed for Emma at every school, every doctor's office, every camp. My blood ran cold. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. Somehow, David knew about Emma. Somehow he'd discovered whose company he'd joined. And tomorrow, at the company-wide meeting, we'd finally come face to face. The pediatrician confirmed what I'd suspected. A mild sprain, not a break. Emma sat bravely through the examination, wincing only slightly as the doctor wrapped her small wrist in a supportive bandage. 2 weeks in this brace, young lady, Dr. Patel instructed. No more cartwheels until I clear you. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened when presented with a purple lollipop. Purple is my favorite, she informed the doctor. Mine too, Dr. Patel replied with a wink. While Emma was distracted with her candy, the doctor pulled me aside. It's a minor injury, but she should rest it tonight. No school tomorrow. I nodded, mentally rearranging my schedule. The company meeting was at 2 p.m. I'd need Maria to stay with Emma until I could get home. In the car, Emma held up her bandaged wrist proudly. Will you sign my brace, Mommy? Like a cast? Of course, pumpkin. I smiled, though my mind was elsewhere. Fixed. On the revelation of David's emergency contact change. At home, after settling Emma with her favorite movie and a dinner of chicken nuggets, a rare indulgence for injured heroes as I'd framed it, I slipped into my office and called Joanna. "Tell me everything," I said without preamble. HR flagged the change. This afternoon, it was submitted first thing this morning through the employee portal. The name instantly pinged our security protocols because it matched your mother's name in your personal file. Did he list a relationship to the contact? Family friend. And get this, he provided your mother's correct phone number. My stomach tightened. How would he have that number? That's what I asked myself. So I pulled his browser history from the company network. And? 2 searches yesterday afternoon. Catherine Bennett Artemis Technologies and Emma Bennett School River Prep. Ice spread through my veins. He knows. Seems that way. The question is, how much? And since when? I thought back to the moment in data services when his eyes had lingered on me. Had there been recognition after all? Had he been playing the same observation game I was? Did he find anything in those searches? I asked. Nothing definitive on you. Your privacy protocols are solid. But there's plenty about Artemis having a female CEO named Bennett. As for Emma, River Prep's website has a photo gallery of their recent science fair. She's in several pictures. Our daughter whom he'd abandoned before birth, whom he'd never seen, never acknowledged, never supported. Catherine? Joanna's voice pulled me back. What are you going to do about tomorrow's meeting? The company-wide gathering where I'd planned to reveal myself to David, a calculated power move that now seemed redundant. He already knew. Proceed as planned, I decided. But I want security briefed, just in case. In case of what? In case David Walker isn't the only one with an agenda. After hanging up, I checked on Emma. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, the movie still playing softly in the background. I carried her to bed, careful not to jostle her injured wrist, and tucked her in with Mr. Snuggles, the stuffed elephant she'd had since infancy. Love you to the moon and back, I whispered, smoothing her hair. Back in my office, I opened my laptop and did what I should have done days ago. I searched for David Walker on social media. His Facebook profile was sparse. Privacy settings high. His LinkedIn showed his employment history, confirming what I already knew. A downward trajectory since leaving Meridian Group. But it was his Instagram, set to public and rarely updated, that gave me pause. 3 months ago, he'd posted a photo of a park bench overlooking the city. The caption read, "Starting over isn't failure. Sometimes it's the only path forward." 2 months ago, a coffee shop interior, steam rising from a cup, planning the next chapter. 1 month ago, the lobby of what I now recognized as our East Wing entrance. New beginnings today, and most recently, just yesterday. A simple shot of a sunset with the caption, "Some truths take time to face. Some debts must be paid." What did it mean? Was he acknowledging his abandonment? Planning some sort of reconciliation? Or was there something more calculated? At work? I closed the laptop unsettled. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Morning brought a flurry of domestic activity. Emma excited about her day off school, Maria arriving early to help with breakfast, me attempting to prepare for the most unusual professional encounter of my career. Remember, she needs to rest that wrist, I instructed Maria, gathering my things. The doctor said ice if it swells, and the pain medication is on the counter if she needs it. We'll be fine, Ms. Bennett, Maria assured me. Emma and I have big plans to make cookies and watch movies. One-handed cookie making, Emma corrected, holding up her bandaged wrist. I'm the supervisor. I smiled despite my tension, kissing the top of her head. Be good for Maria. I'll be home right after my big meeting. The one where all the people who work for you listen to your speech? Emma asked. That's the one. You'll do amazing, Mommy. You always do. Her confidence in me was both touching and steadying. I'd built Artemis for her as much as for myself, to create security, opportunity, a legacy she could be proud of. I wouldn't let David Walker threaten any of that. At the office, I found Joanna waiting in my private conference room with coffee, and the security team lead. All set, she reported. We've briefed security without raising alarms. If Walker makes any unusual moves during the meeting, they'll intercept discreetly. And the Thompson system training has been postponed until next week, added Michael, our head of security. Given the situation, it seemed prudent to delay. I nodded my approval. Any activity on his accounts this morning? He arrived at 8:05, logged into his workstation at 8:12, Michael replied, consulting his tablet. No unusual searches or communications from company devices. He knows we're monitoring, Joanna pointed out. He'd use a personal device for anything sensitive. She was right. David was many things, but never stupid. The board is gathering in the main conference room, Tanya announced, appearing in the doorway. They're expecting a pre-meeting brief at noon. I'll be there, I assured her. After the others left, I stood alone in my office, gathering my thoughts. In 3 hours, I'd face David Walker across the auditorium, the man who'd once promised to love me forever, who'd placed his hand on my pregnant belly and talked about our future, who'd walked away without a backward glance. What would I see? In his eyes? Remorse? Calculation? Or the emotional vacancy that had allowed him to abandon his unborn child? Ms. Bennett? Tanya's voice broke into my thoughts. Marcus Phillips is requesting an urgent meeting. He says it's about David Walker. My pulse quickened. Send him in. Marcus entered, looking uncomfortable. I apologize for the interruption, Ms. Bennett, but there's been an incident in data services. What kind of incident? Walker received a phone call about 20 minutes ago. After he hung up, he requested emergency personal leave for the afternoon. When I asked for details as per protocol, he became agitated. Agitated how? He said it was a family emergency, that he needed to leave immediately. When I explained he'd need approval since he's still in his probationary period, he said, Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Said what? He said, and I quote, "Tell Catherine Bennett I need to see my daughter." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I see. And how did you respond? I told him I'd need to consult with HR about proper protocols, and that I wasn't authorized to communicate directly with the CEO about personal leave for junior staff. Where is he now? In HR, filling out the formal request. But Ms. Bennett, he specifically used your name. How would he even know who you are? Most junior staff have never even seen you. I maintained my composure with effort. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Marcus. I'll handle it from here. After he left, I sat motionless, processing this new development. David wasn't just aware I owned Artemis. He was making a direct play, attempting to force a confrontation on his terms, not mine. Emma. He'd mentioned Emma, claimed her as his daughter after 6 years of silence, of absence. My phone buzzed, a text from Maria, FYI. Emma's grandmother called the house asking to speak with her. I said you'd need to approve any calls. She seemed surprised I answered. My mother rarely called during working hours. I texted back, did she say what she wanted? The reply came quickly. Something about Emma's father contacting her. Should I be concerned? Pieces clicked into place with alarming clarity. David hadn't just discovered Emma existed. He'd contacted my mother, likely using information from the emergency contact he'd added to his file. I called my mother immediately. Catherine, she answered on the first ring. I was just about to call you. What's going on, Mom? Maria said David contacted you. A pause. Yes, yesterday evening. He called saying he'd discovered he had a daughter and wanted to meet her. I told him I couldn't discuss it without speaking to you first. How did he get your number? He said he found it in some old papers. Catherine, he sounded desperate. Said he'd made a terrible mistake 6 years ago and wanted to make amends. Desperation didn't excuse abandonment. Did you tell him anything about Emma? Of course not. But he already knew her name, her age. He mentioned her school. My grip tightened on the phone. Mom, listen carefully. Do not speak to him again. Do not tell him anything about Emma. And most importantly, do not tell Emma about this conversation. Catherine, shouldn't she know her father wants to meet her? Her father walked out when I was 7 months pregnant. He doesn't get to waltz back in because he's suddenly feeling paternal. My mother sighed. People make mistakes, Catherine. Even terrible ones. This isn't about forgiveness, Mom. It's about protecting Emma. After hanging up, I called Maria. New plan. Take Emma to my mother's house immediately. Stay with them until I call. Is everything okay, Ms. Bennett? Just a precaution. And Maria, if anyone other than me comes looking for Emma, call the police. With Emma safely on her way to my mother's, I summoned Joanna and Michael back to my office. David Walker is attempting to force a confrontation, I explained, briefing them on the latest developments. He's leveraged his connection to my mother to gather information about Emma, and now he's trying to leave work to see her. That explains his emergency contact change, Joanna mused. He was establishing a connection to your family on paper. Which raises serious security concerns, Michael added. We should cancel the company meeting. I shook my head. No. This ends today on my terms. Where is Walker now? Michael checked his tablet. Still in HR. His leave request is being processed, but we've instructed them to delay approval until further notice. Good. Keep him there until the meeting. I want security positioned throughout the auditorium, but discreetly. No one moves. Against Walker, unless he becomes physically threatening. Catherine? Joanna said cautiously. Are you sure a public confrontation is wise? This is getting personal, and there are reputational risks to consider. It became personal the moment. He used my daughter as leverage. At 1:30, I met briefly with the board to outline the company's quarterly performance and upcoming initiatives, the official purpose of the meeting. If they noticed my unusual tension, they didn't comment. At 1:55, I stood backstage in the auditorium, reviewing my notes one final time. Through the curtain, I could hear the buzz of conversation as employees filed in, filling the 500-seat space. Somewhere in that crowd sat David Walker, unaware that his plan to force a confrontation was about to backfire spectacularly. We're ready when you are, Ms. Bennett, the AV technician informed me. Presentation is loaded, microphone tested. I nodded, straightening my crimson blouse, the same one I'd worn the day David started work, when he'd walked right past me without recognition. At exactly 2 hours, the lights dimmed, and the company logo appeared on the massive screen behind the stage, my cue. I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight finding me as applause rippled through the auditorium. Scanning the crowd, I located David immediately. 5th row center, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. Good. Afternoon, Artemis Technologies, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules for our quarterly update. For the next 20 minutes, I delivered a standard corporate address, highlighting achievements, acknowledging challenges, outlining future goals. The audience was attentive, responsive, unaware of the personal drama unfolding beneath the professional veneer. David never took his eyes off me. Before we conclude, I said, transitioning to the final segment, I'd like to address a topic that affects every person in this room: integrity. A subtle shift in the audience's attention. This wasn't part of the usual quarterly script. Artemis Technologies was built on a foundation of integrity in our business practices, our client relationships, and our treatment of one another. When I founded this company 6 years ago, I made a promise to myself and to every person who would join us. We would never compromise on our values, no matter the pressure, no matter the cost. My eyes found David's. Unfortunately, integrity isn't universal. Sometimes people make choices that reveal a profound lack of character. Sometimes they walk away from their responsibilities, their promises, their families. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was definitely not the usual corporate rhetoric. 6 years ago, I was 7 months pregnant when my partner decided parenthood wasn't for him. He left a note on our kitchen counter and disappeared from my life. No discussion, no negotiation, no support, financial or emotional, for the child he helped create. The auditorium had gone completely silent. In the 5th row, David had gone pale. I share this not for sympathy, but for context. Because that abandonment became the catalyst for Artemis Technologies. Every late night, every risk, every strategic decision was fueled by my determination to create security for my daughter, to build something that could never walk out on us. I paused, letting the words sink in. Imagine my surprise when that same man, the one who couldn't face the responsibility of fatherhood, applied to work at the company I built while raising our child alone. Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the room. All eyes turned to follow my gaze, settling on David, who sat frozen in his seat. David Walker was hired as a junior data specialist last week, unaware that he was now working for the woman he'd abandoned 6 years ago. The woman who'd gone from single mother to CEO while he'd gone from marketing executive to entry-level data processor. I stepped to the edge of the stage. "Mr. Walker, would you care to join me?" For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might flee the auditorium altogether. But slowly, he stood, making his way to the steps at the side of the stage. The spotlight adjusted to include him as he approached me, stopping several feet away. Up close, I could see the toll the years had taken, the premature lines around his eyes, the tension in his jawline, the slight tremor in his hands. "Catherine," he said, his voice barely carrying through the microphone. "I never knew exactly what you walked away from," I finished for him. "That was by design, Mr. Walker. You chose to leave before meeting your daughter, before seeing what she would become, before witnessing the extraordinary person she is." His eyes glistened. "I've made mistakes. Terrible ones. Yes, you have. And now you're attempting to use my company, my mother, and my daughter as pawns in some misguided bid for redemption." He shook his head. "It's not like that. When I discovered who owned Artemis, who Emma was, you manipulated company resources to gather information about a child you abandoned. You contacted my mother behind my back. You attempted to force a meeting with my daughter without my consent." Audience watched in stunned silence as 6 years of unspoken accusations finally found voice. "I just want to meet her," David said, his voice breaking. "She's my daughter too. Biology doesn't make you a father, Mr. Walker. Presence does. Commitment does. Sacrifice does. You've demonstrated none of these qualities." I turned slightly to address the audience while keeping David in my peripheral vision. Integrity isn't tested when things are easy. It's tested when things are hard, when the responsibility feels overwhelming, when the easier path is to walk away. Returning my full attention to David, I continued. "You failed that test 6 years ago. You're failing it again now by attempting to manipulate your way back into our lives rather than approaching me directly. Honestly, I tried," he protested. "I requested a meeting with you yesterday through proper channels. It was denied." This was news to me. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I submitted a formal request to meet with the CEO regarding a personal matter. HR informed me that junior staff don't have direct access to upper management, and that all personal matters should be addressed through my supervisor." I made a mental note to review that protocol. "So you decided to use my mother as a back channel?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I found her contact information in some old papers. I thought I hoped she might help me make amends. Amends, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Do you really think that's possible? After 6 years of silence? After missing every birthday, every first, every milestone? I don't know, he admitted, his voice so low the microphone barely caught it. But I had to try. I've spent 6 years running from the biggest mistake of my life. When I saw Emma's picture on her school website, when I realized what I'd thrown away, he trailed off, swallowing hard. A part of me, a small wounded part I'd thought long healed, ached at the raw emotion in his voice. But the mother in me, the protector, remained unmoved. Emma is 5 years old, I said, my voice steady. She's bright, compassionate, and resilient. She's learning to read chapter books and can name all the planets in order. She has nightmares about monsters under her bed, but insists on checking for them herself with a flashlight. She's allergic to strawberries, but not other berries. She wants to be an astronaut or maybe a veterinarian, depending on the day. Each detail seemed to hit. David, like a physical blow. These are things a father should know, Mr. Walker. These are moments you chose to miss. He nodded, a tear finally escaping to track down his cheek. I know, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. But Catherine, please, I'm not asking to erase the past. I'm asking for a chance to be in her future. The auditorium remained utterly silent, 500 employees holding their collective breath as they witnessed the most unusual company meeting in Artemis history. I studied David's face, searching for the man I'd once loved, the man I'd planned to raise a family with. All I saw was a stranger who shared DNA with my daughter. This isn't the forum for this discussion, I finally said. This meeting was meant to be a corporate update, not a public airing of personal history. I turned to the audience. I apologize for the unexpected direction this has taken. Artemis Technologies remains committed to our core values of integrity, innovation, and excellence. Thank you for your attention. Department heads, please check your email for follow-up items from today's original agenda. The lights came up, signaling the meeting's end. Employees began to file out, conversation erupting as soon as they cleared the doors. On stage, David and I remained locked in a silent standoff, neither willing to be the first to break eye contact. Joanna appeared at my side. Conference room A is secure and private, she murmured. Michael is stationed outside. I nodded slightly. Mr. Walker, if you'd like to continue this conversation in a more appropriate setting, please follow Ms. Kim. Without waiting for his response, I exited the stage, walking briskly through the backstage area toward the executive wing. My hands were steady, my breathing controlled, but inside, a storm was raging. David Walker had just re-entered my life, bringing with him all the pain, anger, and unresolved emotions I'd spent 6 years burying beneath ambition and achievement. The question now was, what did I intend to do about it? In conference room A, I waited, gathering my thoughts. What did David really want? Redemption? A relationship with Emma? Or something else entirely? The door opened, and David entered, escorted by Joanna. She gave me a questioning look, and I nodded, dismissing her. When the door closed, leaving us truly alone for the first time in 6 years, the weight of shared history and divergent paths hung heavy between us. You've done well for yourself, David said finally, gesturing vaguely to encompass the building, the company, my position. No thanks to you. He winced. I deserve that. You deserve far worse. He nodded, accepting this. I know explaining won't change anything, but I want you to understand what happened 6 years ago. Enlighten me, I said coldly. David took a deep breath. I panicked. Plain and simple. One day I was imagining our future together, and the next I was terrified of failing you both, My father. He broke off, shaking his head. My father was a terrible parent, abusive, erratic. I grew up, promising myself I'd never be like him. But as your due date got closer, I started having nightmares about becoming him, about hurting our child the way he hurt me. So instead of talking to me, instead of seeking help, you just walked out, left a note and disappeared? It was cowardly, he admitted. The biggest regret of my life. I told myself you'd be better off without me, that the baby would be safer if I wasn't there to mess them up. Her, I corrected sharply. Emma, not the baby. A little girl with your smile and my eyes who spent 5 years wondering why her father didn't want her. Pain flashed across his face. I was wrong. So wrong. I've spent every day since coming to terms with that. While I was raising our daughter alone, while I was building this company to ensure she'd always have security. You've done an amazing job, he said quietly, with both Emma and Artemis. Better than we could have done together, probably. The simple acknowledgement, so different from the defensiveness I'd expected, caught me off guard. Why now, David? Why after 6 years? He met my gaze directly. Because I hit rock bottom, lost my career, my savings, my self-respect. Ended up in therapy, finally dealing with my childhood trauma instead of running from it. My therapist asked what I would regret most at the end of my life, and the answer was immediate: abandoning my child. So this is about assuaging your guilt? No, he said firmly. It's about taking responsibility for my actions. It's about trying to repair what I broke, even knowing some damage can never be undone. I studied him, searching for deception, for manipulation. Found only weary honesty. When did you realize Artemis was my company? 3 days ago. James Thompson mentioned he'd referred me to a company run by a brilliant CEO named Bennett. It clicked when I saw your mother's name in my employee file as your emergency contact. I searched for confirmation and found Emma's picture on her school website. He shook his head. She looks so much like you. She has your smile, I said, the admission slipping out before I could stop it. A complicated emotion crossed his face, grief and pride mingled together. I'd like to meet her, on your terms, with whatever boundaries you set. I don't expect to walk into her life as dad. I haven't earned that. But maybe someday, I could be someone positive in her world. The request was reasonable, measured, without the entitlement I'd feared. Still, alarm bells rang in my mind. And if I say no? If I decide Emma's better off without a father who might walk away again when things get difficult? Then I'll respect your decision, he said quietly. I'll keep working here, if you'll still have me, and I'll hope that someday you might reconsider. But I won't go behind your back again. I won't contact your mother or Emma's school or anyone else connected to her. I leaned back in my chair, weighing his words against 6 years of absence, of single parenthood, of building a life that had no space for David Walker. I need time, I finally said. This isn't just about you and me. It's about what's best for Emma. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a definitive no either. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Walker. I haven't decided anything. As he stood to leave, a question that had been gnawing at me surfaced. The childcare comment you made. To your colleague, who were you referring to? He looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. My nephew. My sister's son. I watch him sometimes when her regular sitter cancels, so there was no other child, no family he'd chosen to stay with when he couldn't bear to stay with us. One more thing, I said as he reached the door. Your position here. He turned, resignation, in his eyes. I understand if you need to let me go. Actually, I was going to ask if you're satisfied in data services. Your background is in marketing, after all. Surprise replaced resignation. Yes, I'm grateful for any position, honestly. After the career spiral I've been on, I'm lucky to have steady employment. I nodded, making a mental note. That's all. For now, Mr. Walker, you may return to your department. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room, thoughts swirling. The confrontation I'd anticipated for days had gone nothing like I'd expected. I'd prepared for anger, for defensiveness, even for hostility. Instead, I'd encountered contrition, honesty, and a seemingly genuine desire for redemption. The question remained, could I trust it? More importantly, should I allow Emma to? My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Emma's having a wonderful time. She drew the most beautiful picture of a rocket ship going to the moon. When are you coming to get her? I replied. About an hour. Everything okay there? Perfect. No unexpected visitors, if that's what you're asking. I put the phone down, mind made, up. Before making any decisions about David's place in Emma's life, I needed to understand exactly who he'd become in the 6 years since he'd walked away from us. And as his employer, I had unique access to find out. 2 weeks passed in a careful dance of observation and assessment. I hadn't fired David after our confrontation, nor had I granted his request to meet Emma. Instead, I'd created a third option, a period of evaluation during which I could determine whether the man who'd walked away deserved a second chance with our daughter. The Thompson system training begins today, Joanna reminded me. Walker's first session is at 9. I nodded, reviewing the schedule I'd designed myself. And Lisa understands the parameters? Progressive difficulty, documentation of his problem solving, approach, stress testing, all set. Most employees waited a year before attempting the Thompson certification. I'd accelerated David's timeline deliberately, needing to see how he handled pressure, frustration, and potential failure. Throughout the day, I received updates from Lisa. David was struggling with the technical aspects, but showing remarkable persistence. By evening, he was still there. Training Room B, Tanya reported at 7 p.m. Lisa left hours ago, but he requested permission to continue practicing. I made my decision quickly. I'll lock up personally. The training wing was quiet at this hour. Through the glass wall, I could see David hunched over a computer, frustration evident in his posture. Ms. Bennett, he said, surprised when I entered. I mean, Catherine, sorry, I'm not sure what's appropriate here. Ms. Bennett is fine at work, I replied, setting my tablet down. How's the training going? He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Challenging. The system architecture is unlike anything I've worked with before. You've made it to Module 3, I observed, glancing at his screen. That's further than most first-timers get on day 1. Really? He looked genuinely surprised. The average is Module 2, with a 68% error rate. You're at 42%. Pride momentarily displaced his fatigue. I'd still like to get it lower before tomorrow. Hence the late hours. Yeah, the apartment's pretty quiet anyway. Your living situation? Renting a room in a shared house, he explained. Nothing fancy, but it's close to the office and within my budget. This matched HR's report. He was living paycheck to paycheck, with significant debt still outstanding. Lisa says you're demonstrating good analytical skills despite the technical learning curve. He smiled slightly. Marketing strategies and data systems aren't that different at their core. Both require identifying patterns, understanding relationships between variables. Why did you leave marketing? I asked. Even after Meridian, your skills would have been valuable elsewhere. His expression clouded. After I left? Us? I couldn't focus. Made mistakes. Got passed over for promotions, then eventually let go. Each subsequent position was a step down from the last. A 6-year downward spiral. Rock bottom was about 8 months ago, he confirmed. Eviction notice, car repossessed, credit destroyed. That's when I finally started therapy. And now? Now I'm trying to rebuild. I don't expect forgiveness, Catherine. What I did was unforgivable. But I am trying to be someone who deserves to know his daughter. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. I stood, needing distance from the pull of shared history. It's late. Security will be doing final rounds soon. He nodded, saving his progress. Thank you for not firing me after the meeting. Most people would have. I'm not most people. No, he agreed quietly. You never were. The next morning, Emma ambushed me with a question at breakfast. Mommy, do you work with my dad? My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. What makes you ask that? She shrugged, pushing cereal around her bowl. Grandma said sometimes people from the past come back when they're ready to be better. Mental note: have a serious conversation with my mother about appropriate topics with a 5-year-old. Your grandmother likes to believe in second chances, I said carefully. So you do work with him? Her eyes, so like mine, were wide with curiosity. Yes, I admitted finally. Your father recently started working at my company. Her spoon clattered against the bowl. Can I meet him? The question I'd been dreading. I don't know yet, Pumpkin. It's complicated. Because he left us? Yes. She considered this with the straightforward logic of childhood. But if he's sorry, don't we have to forgive him? That's what Ms. Peterson says. Forgiveness is important, I agreed. But so is trust, and trust has to be earned, especially after it's been broken. Is he trying to earn it? I thought of David working late, his humble living conditions, his therapy sessions. I think he might be. But I need to be sure. Before I let him meet you, she nodded solemnly. Because you're protecting me. Always. Over the next week, small data points accumulated. David arriving early, staying late, forming positive workplace relationships, despite the awkwardness his public history with me might have created. He hadn't contacted my mother again, nor tried to circumvent my authority regarding Emma. On day 8, Tanya placed a file on my desk. Mr. Walker completed the Thompson certification exam. His results are inside. David had passed with a score of 83%, well above average for a first attempt. More telling were the comments from trainers. Demonstrates persistence when facing obstacles. Openly acknowledges knowledge gaps without defensiveness. Collaborates effectively with team members. Shows humility and willingness to learn from junior staff. These weren't the traits of the man who'd walked out 6 years ago, the man too afraid of failure to even try being a father. That night, Emma presented me with a drawing, a family portrait, showing her and me holding hands with a question mark figure standing nearby. Is that who I think it is? I asked gently. She nodded. I made his face a question mark because I don't know what he looks like anymore. The pictures you showed me were from before. My heart contracted. Would you like to meet him? For real? Her eyes widened. Can I? If you want to. But only if you're sure, and only with me there the whole time. She thought about this carefully. I think I want to. But what if he doesn't like me? Oh, Emma, that's impossible. You're the most amazing person in the world, she smiled, but doubt lingered in her eyes. What if he leaves again? The question hit me like a physical blow. The same fear that had kept me from making this decision for 2 weeks. I can't promise he won't, I said honestly. But this time, you have me. You'll always have me, no matter what. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. Okay, I want to meet him. I texted David that evening. Emma has agreed to meet you. Saturday, 11 a.m., Riverside Park near the duck pond. 1 hour, supervised by me. These are her terms and mine. His response came immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. I understand the conditions. Saturday arrived bright and clear. I dressed Emma in her favorite purple sweater, trying to act normal while my stomach twisted with anxiety. "Remember," I told her as we walked toward the park, "you don't have to stay if you feel uncomfortable. Just give me our signal, and we'll leave." She squeezed my hand. "I remember, but I think it will be okay, Mommy. Grandma says he has my smile." David was waiting by the duck pond with a paper bag beside him. He stood as we approached, nervousness evident in his posture. "Hi," he said simply, eyes moving from me to Emma with barely concealed emotion. "Emma," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is David Walker, your biological father." Emma studied him intently. "You look like your pictures, but older." A surprised laugh escaped him. "That happens over time." "I know," she replied seriously. "Cell division and renewal. We learned about it in science." David glanced at me, clearly impressed. "You like science?" She nodded. "I'm going to be an astronaut veterinarian, to take care of animals in space." "That's actually brilliant," he said, and I could see he meant it. The ice broken, Emma's natural. Curiosity took over. She peppered David with questions about his favorite color, blue, whether he could do cartwheels, badly, if he liked dinosaurs, who doesn't. He answered each one with patient attention, never talking down to her, never attempting to force emotional connection. I watched from the neighboring bench, close enough to intervene but giving them space. David had brought bread for the ducks, and soon he and Emma were laughing as the birds competed for crumbs. "She's incredible," he said quietly, when Emma moved ahead to follow a particularly aggressive mallard. "You've done an amazing job, Catherine." "Yes, I have," I agreed, without modesty. "She's everything to me." "I see that. Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I haven't earned it." "You're right. You haven't," I replied. "But Emma deserves the opportunity to make her own decisions about you, within safe boundaries." He nodded, understanding the subtext. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a carefully controlled introduction for Emma's benefit, not his. "I've been thinking about your position at Artemis," I said, changing topics. He tensed slightly. "I understand if this complicates things too much?" "Actually, I've reviewed your Thompson certification results. They're impressive for a beginner." "Thank you." "Marcus mentioned your marketing background has been useful in helping the team reframe data presentations for clients." He looked surprised that I knew this detail. "Just a few suggestions, nothing major. Nevertheless, it demonstrates cross-functional thinking." I paused. "There's an opening in our client solutions department. It combines data analysis with client-facing communications. The salary is better than your current position." His expression was complex: surprise, gratitude, suspicion. "Why would you offer me that?" "Because it would be good for Artemis to utilize your complete skill set. And because if you're going to be in Emma's life in any capacity, I need you financially stable." "In Emma's life," he repeated, hope cautiously entering his voice. "Does that mean—" "It means today went well," I clarified. "It means we'll consider another meeting, perhaps next weekend. It means we're taking this one step at a time." Emma returned, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mommy, the duck followed me all the way to the bridge." "Impressive duck whispering skills," I commented, checking my watch. "It's almost time to go, Pumpkin. We have lunch with Grandma, remember?" Her face fell slightly. "Already?" "I'm afraid so. But maybe we can visit the park again sometime." She turned to David. "Will you come too? Next time?" He glanced at me, waiting for my cue. "If that's what you want," I told Emma. "And if David is available?" "I'll be available," he said quickly. "Anytime." As we prepared to leave, Emma surprised us both by extending her hand to David. "Thank you for the duck bread." He shook her hand solemnly, blinking rapidly. "You're very welcome, Emma." Walking away, Emma slipped her hand into mine. "He's nice." she observed. Yes, he seems to be. But you're still sad mad at him. I looked down, startled by her perception. Sad mad? Mm-hmm. Like when I broke your special vase but didn't mean to. You were mad, but also sad, and you still loved me anyway. Out of the mouths of babes. It's complicated, Emma. Grown-ups always say that, because it's usually true. She considered this. Do you think he'll stay this time? The question pierced straight to my heart. I don't know, Pumpkin. But I do know that no matter what happens with David, you and I are forever. Nothing can change that. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. To the moon and back. And to the stars and home again, I finished our familiar litany. 2 days later, David accepted the client solutions position. The transfer would take effect at the end of the month after he completed his Thompson project. Are you sure about this? Joanna asked as we reviewed the paperwork. Having him in a more visible role means you'll interact more frequently. I'm sure it's the right business decision, I replied. His skill set is being wasted in data entry. And personally? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I don't know, Joanna. 2 weeks ago, I was prepared to humiliate him publicly and fire him. Now I'm promoting him and allowing supervised visits with Emma. Because you've forgiven him? No, I said firmly. Because Emma deserves the chance to know her father, and because he seems genuinely committed to being in her life this time. And you're protecting her by keeping him where you can see him. Precisely. That evening, as Emma applied glow-in-dark stars to her ceiling, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you or Artemis down. More importantly, I won't let Emma down again. I watched Emma carefully positioning her stars, her face intent with concentration. What do you think, Mommy? Is the Big Dipper in the right place? Perfect, I assured her. You've created your own solar system. Later, after she was asleep, I replied, Actions speak louder than words. Prove it every day. His response came quickly. I intend to. For as long as it takes. 6 months later, I observed from the doorway as David presented a client solution to the Thompson team. His confidence had returned, but differently, tempered with humility, with awareness of his past failures and current responsibilities. The data integration looks seamless, Richard Thompson commented, clearly impressed. This will streamline our entire operation. That's the goal, David replied. We've built in flexibility for future expansion while maintaining the security protocols Ms. Bennett established. The appropriate credit to me, the professional demeanor, the collaborative approach, all evidence of the changes he'd worked to make. In those 6 months, David had proven himself valuable as an employee. More importantly, he'd shown consistent commitment to rebuilding a relationship with Emma through weekly visits that had gradually extended in duration and scope. He'd never missed a scheduled meeting, never circumvented my authority, never pushed for more than Emma was ready to give. He'd accepted my terms without complaint, understanding they were the consequence of his actions. Last week, Emma had asked if David could attend her school science fair. He helped me with my rocket design, she'd explained, and he's never seen my school. It would be a significant step, acknowledging him publicly as part of her life. I'd hesitated, then agreed, watching her face light up with excitement. Really? Can we tell Grandma too? Of course. That night, I'd texted David. Science fair, Thursday, at 7. Emma wants you there. We'll meet you in the lobby. His response had been characteristically careful. I'd be honored. Thank you for considering it. Now, watching him lead the Thompson presentation, I reflected on our strange journey. The man who'd walked out at my most vulnerable moment now worked for the company I'd built in his absence. The father who'd abandoned. His unborn child was slowly earning a place in her life. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever, But it was something like acceptance, like recognition that people could change, could grow, could become better versions of themselves. As the meeting concluded, David glanced up and saw me. He nodded slightly, professional respect in the gesture. I returned the nod, then turned to leave. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Emma finished her science project. Rocket looks amazing. She says to tell you she's added 3 family members to the crew manifest. You, her, and maybe David if he keeps his promises. I smiled despite myself. My daughter, wise beyond her years, had perfectly articulated our reality. A probationary family, built on tentative trust and careful boundaries, with potential for something more permanent if promises were kept. That evening, as I helped Emma with her rocket, she asked the question that had been coming for months. "Mommy, is David going to be part of our family again?" I set down the glue gun, giving her my full attention. "What do you think about that possibility?" She considered seriously. "I think I'd like it. But only if you would too." "It's not that simple, Pumpkin. Because you're still sad mad?" "Partly. And because building trust takes time, especially after it's been broken." She nodded sagely. "Like Humpty Dumpty. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.